Hello and welcome to this week's Student Experience podcast. My special guest today is Martin Lock. Martin is the Manager of International Student Engagement at TAFE Queensland International, and he's also a board member of Study Queensland. In his role at the International Department of TAFE Queensland International, Martin's focus is to grow, support, enhance, connect and develop the programs that TAFE Queensland can deliver to our international student market globally. By giving these students an excellent education and practical industry-related outcome, it allows them to become more employable when they look for jobs. Previously, Martin also founded and managed Study Finder, which is an Australian online platform that helps students identify and apply to education institutions based on the course options within an area of interest from a variety of universities, TAFEs and private colleges across Australia. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today, Tanya. It's a privilege.
It's a pleasure. Now, when I first met you, which I think was in April last year, I had no idea that there actually was an international student market in TAFE. So I'd always been assuming that international students only came for university, and I know I'm not alone in that. Can you tell us a bit about the size of the international student market in TAFE and what the attraction of TAFE is to our international students?
Sure. So here at TAFE Queensland, we have sort of on average about 3,500 students currently studying or just about to start their studies. And I guess at this time of the year, we're about to kick off in our first semester for 2020, which is quite exciting. The good thing about our students that we focus from the international market is that the diversity of the nationality makeup. So a lot of those students come from over 80 countries, and we've worked long and hard to maintain a strong, diverse international mix of our students. And there's a number of reasons why we focus on that. And one is sort of, we get told by a number of our networks and stakeholders that we engage with globally around having too many of one nationality in a class can not provide a good learning experience. Why would I come from a particular country only to be in a class full of my own country people? And the other thing too is that they want to experience an Australian lifestyle and have that engagement with the locals as such. So we try and work on building our domestic cohort, and obviously with TAFE Queensland, we have over 120,000 students enrolled studying a various array of courses, online, in class, face-to-face apprenticeship, and also with our international market. So the good thing with our domestic base, we have a large domestic base. For our international students, it's a way of building them into our programs. And obviously we have to adhere and meet a lot of compliance and requirements by our regulator. But the good thing is that with TAFE, it's been really quite an unknown sector in some countries. Like, what is vocational education? They've been drilled by their parents and traditionally focused on, I must get a degree because it's the only way to get a job. And I think historically, and I can speak for myself, that was how I was pushed when I finished high school. I must go to university to get a degree, otherwise I won't get a job. And I think the value of what a certificate and diploma means to certain students doesn't quite equate to a degree. So for us, we've tried to also, educate the market around what vocational education does. The good thing with TAFE is that we have not only the qualifications, but also being a government entity can also mean we can open up a lot of doors across many different countries. The thing that we try and work on is that it's not just sitting in a classroom, whether it's with other international students or with domestic students. It's about the learning environment. And I think the attraction that we seem to get feedback from our international students is that they love the theory. They love the fact that it's not exam based, and that its ability to actually do the task or hand in an assignment, or there might be an exam in midterm or towards the end of the semester. But it's also the practicality of what our training provides, whether it be in a simulated classroom environment, for example, in our cookery kitchens or our gaming classrooms. And also, and this is quite the unique thing, and I think a lot of countries now are starting to wake up and acknowledge this, is that it's about engaging with the industry and getting the industry to tell us this is what these jobs are about. We need your students to be able to do X, Y, Z in the industry. And I think a lot of international students want that now. They don't want to be sitting in a lecture theatre. And this is no disrespect to the university sector, because there's still strong importance that they bring to the education sectors. But it's about the fact that students don't want to be long-term students. They don't want to be studying and stressed out with exams and assignments and learning. They want to be able to get a qualification that gets them into the next job. And I think the challenges, and this is one of the key things that we've been working on, is that international students are no different to domestic students. They're I guess, what I'm looking at is the generational aspects, Gen Y, Gen X, Gen Z, the millennials. Their needs and desires are exactly the same almost, whether a student from China or a student from Australia. They're going to have different career paths. And the good thing with our programs, and this is where I think TAFE and providers in our sector are working towards, is that these students need skills for a job that they're looking at in the next 2 years. And then when they've finished with that, they're looking for the next step up into their career path or the step across. And I think this is where the attraction's coming from, is that we can provide skill sets that, I guess, diversify their own needs in order to meet their career desires, whether it be, starting off as being a chef and then later on they move into business management and ending up being in childcare. We've seen a lot of students with career changes like that, and we're adapting to meeting those needs, whether it's an Australian or a student from Brazil. So I think in order to really hone in on why we work on the diversity and why we've got good numbers and we've had strong growth over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, is the fact that we're also seeing students doing things outside the norm. And I'll give you some examples around this. Recently, we had a Korean student. She's a female from South Korea. She came over to our Gold Coast campus, studied heavy vehicle certification. She ended up working in the heavy vehicle industry down in Burleigh on the Gold Coast, and has really defined that sort of working outside the box, taking it to, I'm a minority in a male-dominated industry and doing quite well, and getting the respect from her peers as well as industry colleagues as well. And that for us is quite a breakthrough, because back home, she may not have been able to get a job in the heavy vehicle, let alone maybe working for Hyundai or Kia or the likes. So that's really exciting to see sort of students step outside their comfort zones and really challenge those barriers to certain industries. Just as much as we've seen Chinese students coming doing childcare. And traditionally in China and most Asian countries, we see that the children and the grandchildren are typically looked after by the grandparents, and then the mums and dads are looking after the grandparents too. But now we're starting to see the childcare industry develop and grow. It takes time, yes, we realise that, but when we're starting to see industries form from something traditionally like that, it's quite exciting for us. And we've seen a lot of successful students in childcare working in the industry here in Australia and providing that diversity of what our multiculturalism is known for here in Australia, but also going back home and setting up their practices back home. And the third case, which I really, really love, and it's quite an exciting one, sends goosebumps all over my body, is that a couple of years ago we had a Swedish student come and study sports development with us. She was an ex-Olympian who broke her back in a sporting injury, and then after her recovery decided to come down to Australia and study at our Mooloolaba campus on the Sunshine Coast. And she did our diploma of sport development, but she also did it with one of our, I guess, themed programs, which was surfing. So she actually learned to surf as well with our surfing academy up there.
Cool.
And because the surfing academy is run by an ex-professional surfer there on the Sunshine Coast, she'd never really sort of surfed before. She was a bit nervous because of her broken back and her history, but because of her Olympic background and the fact that she was a gymnast, she had the ability and coordination skills to learn that. And the great thing about this is that after her studies, she had such a great experience with TAFE and the engagement with the Australian community, and that she actually embraced it and opened it up and said, I'm letting this all in because this is the best experience ever. She now advocates back home in Sweden for, people with sporting injuries or similar injuries and rehabilitation. And, it's sort of like the break it before you make it type of thing. And she actually comes and talks to our student cohorts from time to time. So she travels down from Sweden. And we had her recently last semester come and talk to our current sporting students across our 3 campuses on the Sunshine Coast, Brisbane and Gold Coast, about her experiences and how to sort of look at developing core strengths, just in case, you do break a back or you had a leg injury or a foot, ankle injury or whatever it might be. And it's that sort of, re-engaging alumni, which is something not quite common in the TAFE world, back into, and it sort of adds that value add to the students, which they all love. And that's really where, these stories transition across multiple countries, and we showcase that as best as we can. As much as I've got a sales team that are based around the world engaging with the students, the best story is from a student themselves, not from a salesperson.
That sounds really exciting. And I just love that. Like, I know from my background, when I first, way back in the distant last century kind of time, was looking at what I would do, it was like TAFE for practical, university for a career. And I was actually looking at doing TAFE and then transitioning into, because I was doing accounting. That transition stuff. So it's really great that practical element has stayed throughout, but now it sounds like it's growing into a different dimension almost. And that agility where people are able to make a much faster transition than perhaps a full degree or something like that, but they can try something and they can actually work in that space for a few years. Is that for me? Move into another area without the big the financial burdens that you would have of doing a full degree. So they could almost try something before they buy it almost.
Almost exactly. And that's exactly the approach that we try and say with students, is that for some industries, it is a try before you buy, like, a business diploma. We find students who have come to us whose parents have traditionally said, you must go off and do a degree in business with a finance major. Great. I've had students coming to me and saying, I don't want to be in finance or economics. I actually want to be a chef. I'm like, great, because that's my background. Historically, I was a chef, and I can talk to you about food. And again, we've got to try and push students into their passion, not corral them into something that they feel is going to suffocate them. And I think the good thing is that they can try for 1 year or 6 months a program and go, oh, yes, that's quite all right, but it's not quite for me, but it's not wasted. They can still utilize the skills they've obtained from there and apply it to something else that they're more, passionate about. And we've seen students come and do a diploma of business, and then they've gone and teed it up with a certificate in childcare. Or recently, in a trip I went to the Philippines, I had a student come and say to me, I want to do a diploma in childcare plus a diploma in mental health. And I sort of was taken back a bit by going, wow, that's an interesting combination. Please explain. She said, well, here in the Philippines, and I'm sure it's quite a common issue globally, is that there's a lot of young children with mental health problems, and I want to start a practice in that. And I just went, wow, that's a light bulb moment. I've never heard of anyone addressing that. And I'm thinking, that's something that is, groundbreaking, but the ability to actually sit there and look at the programs and marry them up and look at their outcomes. I'm sure that student, when she did enroll, when she comes, I think in July this year, I'm quite excited to sort of see how their journey proceeds after their studies with us. And it's only 1 year that she'll be with us. And the great thing is to sort of see where she goes and whether she has a practice set up here in Australia or in another country or back home in the Philippines. It would be really good. And that's where I guess the challenge for us as an education provider and the challenge with students is looking at those future jobs and going, where do they lie? 5-6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now that Facebook's been around almost 10 years plus, is that social media wasn't even considered a serious career path. But now we've got, you can be a Facebook marketing manager, you can be a social media influencer, things that, we don't think of now. We've got to look at 5 years down the track and see what qualifications do we need to meet those needs? And also, will the students want those needs? And I guess for some industries, they need those qualifications, like to be a chef, they need the certificate 3 and the certificate 4 in order to be able to work. Same with childcare, same with nursing. And so for some industries, the qualification is a requirement as a need for employment. But the good thing is it doesn't take years and years and years, and also cost, in order for them to achieve their goals. And again, that's just, I always say to a lot of students, it's a platform, and we see a lot of students using that platform to elevate into a degree later on, which can meet this, their parents' excitement that they've finally got a degree, but that doesn't mean that they have to spend another 3 or 4 years. With the credit arrangements we have with a number of our university partners, they can study with us and go to university in the same duration and come out with 2 or 3 qualifications. So that would look amazing on their resume, to have that come out. And I think that's one of the things now, is that we're starting to get recognition of the transition between the 2 sectors, and that transition from us to employment, and the fact that industry is now more involved in the development of how we deliver our qualifications. And that to me is more important than just going, all right, we've got a diploma of business, you go into that course and be done with it. So yeah,
and I think also
exciting times.
That complementary nature as well. So I was talking to a young fellow that I know last night actually, and he was saying how he's doing his bachelor's in primary school, primary education, but he's also doing a diploma in early childhood care, so that, if he's teaching for prep students, then he's much more able to manage that transition for students who are not yet quite ready for school, things like that. So just that ability to add, a university qualification with a TAFE qualification, and just seeing things in a different way. I think it's really exciting that we're finally getting to that point where we are looking at things in different ways. And I think that's going to be really good. So my next question for you is coming back more to that international student experience, and that's really what the challenges that those students do go through when they first come to Australia and start their studies, because I know quite often they turn up and almost going into class the next day sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, the challenges that we see, and it's probably not isolated to 1 or 2 countries experiencing this. It's all students, whether they come from the UK or South America or Asia as such, is that we've got to look at it from their eyes. These students have packed up their home. They're leaving their family networks. They're leaving their friend networks. They're leaving their comfort blanket to then embark on not only a new country, but also to undertake study, and also undertake study that they might not be used to in their home country. I guess the challenges that we've seen from a lot of international students is that the transition from, say, high school and university in their home country, where they might have studied 5-6 days a week, and it's 8 till 6, really long hours of educational study, and they get here and they go, what do you mean I've only got 3 days a week in class? What do I do with the rest of my time? What do you mean it's 20 hours a week? What is this practical simulation? Do I need, what textbooks do I need for that? And it's all those questions they start to build up, which obviously can lead to a lot of issues around anxiety and depression. And the key thing, and look, I'm, hands up, I'm not an Australian. I was born in New Zealand, but I've been living here now for 20 years, is that my transition over here is the knowing the unknown. What do I need to do to set myself up? Where am I going to get money from? What type of job am I going to get? It's all those questions that start to build up, let alone going, okay, how am I going to make friends? How do I socialize? What am I going to do on a Friday night? My English, is it going to be good, bad, or indifferent? All these questions are really, really the biggest challenges that these international students experience. That, I guess, a real fine layer that sort of, I guess, it sort of lies underneath too, and it's probably because Australia is well known for, is that there's a lot of dangerous creatures here apparently. Crocodiles and sharks and snakes and spiders and drop bears and whatever else that you want to throw into the mix, let alone bushfires, storms and floods and hail and dust storms. Australia is quite diverse in itself. without sort of trying to put it into a tourism spin, but those things happen in other countries as well, and it just happened to happen here. And unfortunately, students do freak out when they come here, not realizing the size of Australia. I think that's also quite daunting as well, because they may have come from a country where, say, let's take Tokyo, millions and millions and millions of people, great infrastructure, and then they come to, Cairns, and the infrastructure is not quite there, but Cairns in Japan have had a long tourism history there. And so the transition to come down and go, wow, I've got the Great Barrier Reef and I've got the Daintree on my back doorstep, and then I've got to go to class, and then finding their way around the campus and going, where do I go? My English is not too great. Ones that they don't understand me, I'm going to feel lost. And that's one of the things that I think international students fear, is that if they don't know what they're going to experience or what they need to know, they then shut down. And that's some of the challenges that we've seen, is that teachers and students and the community need to show that embracing spirit and sort of open up a bit and basically help where they can, possibly to provide a better, environment for these students to walk into. The hardest ones too is also finding that ability that when they're homesick, how do we deal with that? And a lot of things have come down to culture. It's hard for certain cultures, the female to deal with the male. It's hard for older students, mature students, dealing with younger staff members, or being in a classroom with a younger audience. So that's some of the other challenges as well, is that we've got students who are 18 and finished high school here domestically, and then we've got a 37-year-old from Brazil in the same classroom. Their approach to that is, why am I in a class full of young people? There's all these things. But again, it happens in university. I remember being in a lecture theatre many moons ago, and there was a 40-year-old at the time, and I was 18. I'm going, well, why is a 40-year-old in our lecture theatre type of thing? But, things change. Students want a different career paths. And again, these international students, they're paying just as much, if not a little bit more than what our domestic students are paying full fee. And again, they want to get that same outcome. They want that same experience. So again, in their mind, they've got financial challenges. They've got emotional challenges. Some of them will have logistical challenges. And at the end of the day, one of the key things that students do when they get here, and it's depending on when they arrive, but generally in the first 4 weeks, it's, where do I live? How do I communicate with back home? And how do I get a job, part-time, casual, whatever it might be, because I need money. Even though I have money in the account, it only lasts for so long, and then they will need to obviously, once you start earning local currency, it eases the burden upon them. And I think over time, and with all students, it's a different time frame when homesickness kicks in. It's that that stress of, I've got my first assignment. What does group learning mean versus I've got to work with a partner versus I've got to work on my own? That's when they start to go, I need my friends, I need my family. And that's when, the anxiety and other issues start to arise. The good thing, what we've have, and most institutions do this, is that we have international student support officers across the majority of our campuses to deal with a lot of those issues that the students have. And it's, right from day dot when they come to our orientation, and we just had that last Friday with some of our locations, is that it's talking about the do's and the don'ts. The fact that the police here in Australia aren't dictating, and yes, they do carry a gun, but they're not threatening with that. They're not corrupt, or what it might be is that there actually are people you can go in and talk to. They're open and friendly and will help you out. The fact that how do I get a transport card to get on the train or the taxi or the ferry or whatever it might be, and it's the RTA with their rent. Some students do homestay, some students stay in student accommodation. Others obviously might have had connections here previously and they want to go and house share. What are their rights? Does the landlord take them for a ride and say, here's $4,000 bond and you need to pay the first 3 months in advance? These students don't know the rights and wrongs, and it's trying to give them as much information without overloading them, because then next week they're going to have an orientation for their program. and they're going to understand their timetable and their classes. So it's giving them that layer of information that they feel comfortable with, that they can then absorb and then process and then go, right, I'll park that to the side because I might need to know that later on, and then they can focus on the next thing. It's really trying to reduce that anxiety and pressure and stress that not only landing in a new country, but establishing themselves to begin with. And, it's hard work. It's not easy. And I think in order to combat those challenges, we have developed certain programs.
Yeah, and I think it's like you say, it's just reminding ourselves that there is so many other elements that are coming in for these students. It's easy to get frustrated because they're not necessarily easy to understand when they're asking a question, and just to stop and take the time out and trying to understand what their experience is, instead of thinking about, well, I've got 56 million things to do and I just need to get it done, and this person's taking too long to explain in a way that I understand what they're asking for. Just being patient and I guess much more sympathetic than I think sometimes we can be, particularly when we're under the pump as well.
Yeah. And look, this time of the year coming into semester is busy for everyone. We understand that. It's also, a busy time for the local community, with schools going back and people coming back from work and, back to work from holiday. And I guess, it adds a lot of stress in general from everyday life from a normal, local, let alone an international student who's just landed at the airport trying to come out and go, right, what's next? And I guess the key thing to that as well is that we're trying to give a lot of information before they depart their home country. And, obviously the best way is through digital communication. But again, we're relying on them to open it. We're relying on them to understand it. And we're relying on them to reach out and ask questions. And again, we're dealing with not only language barriers, we're dealing with some cultural barriers as well, as that some students don't feel that they can reach out and talk to us. And I think one of the things we've tried to establish in our team is we've got a diverse nationality makeup within our international team, and I think we have over 30 languages spoken. So at least the majority of our student makeup, we can communicate in local language with them if we have to. That also, I guess, provides a layer of comfort to the student to go, right, they actually understand me, they're prepared to talk to me, they're prepared to listen to me. And as you say, it's that patience and time. They're things that, you can't put value on. They are the most important part to the first engagement we have with these students when they land in Australia and come to our class. If that isn't right, the rest of their experiences are going to be questionable. And if they continue having a bad experience, well, guess what? That's going to make it a lot harder for us to recruit more students to Australia. And I think with Australians' personality globally is that we are a open, inviting country, and we don't have the challenges like some countries like the UK or USA have. I think probably our closest rival that mimics our personality is probably Canada. And we've seen numbers grow in Canada. So obviously they're doing something right. We're doing something right. And then we're just trying to, stabilize our markets to say, to where we go into market and say, it's fun to come to Australia. You'll get a good time. You'll have a great experience. You have a great outcome. You've got, chances are you will see a kangaroo. Yes, we don't ride them to school. That's a myth. And there are no drop bears. I guess, all jokes aside, it's also coming down to the recent events we've had in the last couple of months across Australia. And I recently just came back from overseas from holiday, and just the portrayal by media of the bushfires. And then suddenly, we've had flooding on the Gold Coast. We've had storms coming through daily now, and then we've got dust storms in Canberra and hail down in Melbourne. Those things really, hit home in some of these local countries where they go, oh, have I made the right choice? Do I really want to go to Australia? And we've just got to try and sort of say, it's safe, it's good, you still have a great experience. It doesn't affect us as people. We still get on with our everyday life, but we'll also help you as well if you get stuck. And I know that's one of the biggest challenges we had was 2011 when we had the big floods here in Brisbane, and we had our South Bank campus in Brisbane was heavily affected by the Brisbane River. And it was that sending that communication out early, connecting to the students first, and then connecting to the students' families back in their home country and passing on that message. They are safe, they are looked after, they are fine, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that, they'll continue with their studies. We'll help them where they are. We brought on extra, guidance and support and counsellors to help with, all those emotions that come with an event like that. And I think it was one of those things where, it was all hands on deck and everyone put in. And again, it comes down to patience and time. We spent the time. We were patient. We listened to the requests coming through, and we alleviated the concerns that were being raised globally. And look, it took us a few years to recover from that. We felt that no one talks about the floods now. Back then, when we go out to market, they don't question, is Brisbane going to flood next year? Well, who knows? We don't know. And look, we're not worried about it. We move on, and it's sort of like we rebuild. But it's building that confidence in the global markets as well. And those are things that, students look at, and the media and the social media really do have an important part in determining where they go to for a destination. And it's not playing off the fact that Canada's cold and Australia's hot. It's more around, what's going to be best for me.
Well, and talking to some of our Indian students, it is about who has the better cricket team. What defines their destination. So it could be the weather as well, if we just play our cards right. Now, I know you've mentioned a few different ways that we can, change our approach and our mindset. I guess expanding on that, are there any other ways that we can, or any other things that we can do to better provide a learning experience for these students when they come here?
Definitely. I think information is key, and communication and having open channels with our with your international audience is really, really important. Understanding, seeing it from their eyes, and not necessarily going, well, our process says, and we have processes that guide us into way and how we process enrollments and study and assessment, etc. But it's a way of just, providing the information in a way that they understand, because they may not understand the jargon that we're giving to them in a conversation. And, the first thing is that they'll walk away more confused with more questions unanswered than before. We've got to take into account, as I mentioned before, they're moving away from home, family and friends, basically starting a new chapter in their life to better their life for the future as such. And for some students, we've heard stories of the whole village that they've come from have supported that one student to go and come and study here, and they chose us because for whatever reason that they wanted, and then they're going to go back to better their village for the future. And I think we take that for granted. And I think, every student has a story, and sometimes those stories are great to share. Some are very sad to listen to, but you want to do your best to help. We try and help every single student as best as possible. And one of the things we've started and we've implemented across some of our campuses, and we're looking at doing a statewide approach now, is that we've built in a buddy mentor system. And this is something that's probably really key. And it goes back to listening to the student stories. So the system that we looked at, and I know that a few other institutions across Australia have something very similar in place. What we do is we look at our current students. We ask for volunteers who want to be part of this buddy mentor system to buddy up with a newbie, a new student starting their semester. And it's a way to transition into TAFE life, alleviate their concerns, try and build some trust, and also have that connection into the TAFE community. And I think this is something that's probably, when we first started off with, it was a nice to have. Now we're seeing that it's actually more important to grow and enhance this system, because there's things that we see developing. We're like, we should have got to that earlier. How cool we've got that to that earlier. If the student didn't come to the teacher or to a staff member, they went to their peers. And that's the power of their peers, is that we underestimate that. We underestimate the communication they share and the trust that they build, and the fact that the current student's probably gone, oh yes, I went to that class, it was great. Try not to sleep because the teacher will pick on you, or whatever it might be, all those little idiosyncrasies going into class, and also understanding, if your class changes, this is where you need to go on the system to see where the class changes are, so you don't miss your class, or don't miss, Mr. Smith's class. If you're 5 minutes late, he'll, give you a lecture type of thing.
Yeah.
It's trying to build that the do's and don'ts from a student's perspective. And again, students trust students. Students are very, standoffish to staff and authority, and that can be, a blocker. And what we've tried to learn is that if a student's talking to another student, they're more likely to open up and share. And then obviously any of those major issues can be then brought to our attention. Then we implement the necessary procedures in dealing with those issues and concerns. But some of it can be just quite, easy to administer from a current student's perspective. Like, oh, how did you go about traveling on the bus? And they said, well, I've got my little Go card and I tap and tap off. That's really easy. But they go, but how do you top it up? Do I need to have my bank account ready and connected to my card? They said, oh no, you can go to the machines there and you can add whatever you want based on your budget, and you can use cash or you can use your card. But I don't have my Australian bank card yet. Can I use my home card? And it's all those things that everyday life outside their study, these current students can help with the transition. If that transition is smoother and the information is free flowing, their experiences are going to be better, and you'll find that they'll have a far positive experience that they'll share to their friends and family. Now, from a marketing point of view, and I've got to put that hat on a lot of the time, is that if students share their stories, it saves cost for me, but I want to be able to say that that's our student, that's our alumni, that was what they experience, and all students can experience a similar study journey with us. And that's one of the things I think we were focusing on. What we're trying to also do is try and bring in domestic students, local Australians who want to be buddy mentors. And we started that last year. And, in one campus, we probably have about 12 mentors that sort of buddy up with a couple of the current students. And some of them, we try and buddy up, maybe a Korean student with some current Korean students starting their program because of the language. And the fact that if they can speak local language with each other, it builds confidence. But then we also want to try and encourage their English language as well, because that then enhances their confidence when they're out in the public. And we thought if we bring in domestic students, they're likely to have some better idea around local things, but also it's a flip side to it as well. We want our domestic students to be globalized as well. Now, if our international students are being engaged with our Australian students, we should be giving our Australian students exposure to the international markets, because a lot of them, when they finish, they'll probably go backpacking overseas, or they'll go and look for a job, or they'll get a job here which has opportunity to transition into branches and offices in other countries. And if they have understanding and cultural awareness of the nationalities that our students come from, then we're sort of building a more global community and a better acceptance of a global community. And that's quite important too. So it's sort of enhancing the international experience, but we've also got to enhance our domestic experience as well. So we're sort of hitting it from both sides. And to us, it's we can't do it with staff members because the students just don't open up, and it's really key to have student-to-student connections. But it's also finding the students to volunteer, because it is a voluntary position. But the idea is that there's lots of activities that we put on to enhance that, whether it be beach volleyball or cricket, or barbecues and picnics in the parks, and we have orientation weeks on campus, and there's lots of activities on campus that we encourage. And we have particular areas of study and faculties that will put on events throughout the year, which Create is one that we've got across some of our campuses, where all the creative students from music, dance, performance, graphic design, screen and media come together, and they showcase their semester or year's work. And it's a really vibrant time of the year where everyone's all on campus. It's just a good vibe on campus, and it's really sort of energetic. But you've got all walks of life on there, experiencing their own culture through music or dance or performance, and it's really exciting to see. And at the same time, it also showcases that, the international students can experience that, even though they might be studying IT. They go, oh, I don't, apart from Harmony Day, what other international events do I need to be part of? We listen to international students, we do feedback surveys, and they say, just because we're an international student, don't isolate us as being an international student. Don't segregate us from the domestic. We want to be part of all events. We don't need a specific event to showcase that we're an international student. So again, we're looking at all our events and going, right, graduation, you're all in it together. Orientation, yes, we have an international one for compliance reasons, but then the generic orientation for programs, everyone's in. They all got to, they're all a student at the end of the day. They all have the same student ID number. One might come from Japan, the other one comes from Kingaroy. No difference whatsoever. They're in the same course. Treat them the same. If they feel like they're being treated the same, their experience is going to be better as well. And it's, it takes a lot of time and effort to even get our teachers to recognise that. Sometimes they can't speak too quickly in class. They've got to sometimes maybe explain a few things a bit more. But, we're a multicultural nation, and some of our domestic students, English is a second language, and we have a lot of migrants and refugees coming as well through various government programs, and they're integrating into our programs further on. And we just sometimes take for granted that, some of our local students need a little bit of extra help, and the teachers need to provide that extra help to them and also to the international students. So it's more, again, it comes back to what you said before, patience and time. It really is key, and having those student-to-student connections.
Yep, I love that. That sounds great. So they're all the questions that I had for you, Marty. Did you want to share something like perhaps a recent award that you guys won? Get it out there. Let's celebrate.
Well, it's what we talked about today. It's sort of been a labour of love for a number of years, and with our international team, we know that there's national awards that institutions like us can apply for. And last year, through the Australian Training Awards, there's a category for International Training Provider of the Year. We put in our submission the year before, and we just missed out. So we tried again last year. And in November last year, we were successful in obtaining the International Training Provider of the Year. So it was quite exciting to have that recognition and acknowledgement of the hard work that our team have put in over a number of years. And, under our strong leadership of Janelle Chapman, our executive director here, who's a strong advocate from national, global connections right down to the localized, statewide connections. As you mentioned, I sit on a number of these study clusters and represent TAFE Queensland, but also represent the voice of how students want to be engaged, why we need this focus in a particular region, and really enhancing those experiences across the state. And we've purposely been working hard to be an advocate in all levels of government, and advocating across all sectors, and embracing everything from English language colleges, high schools, to us, right through to university and industry. And it's quite a complex matrix of having to do it different governments and different sectors, but also trying to do it globally as well, and utilising our channels across all countries. But it's exciting to receive that award. But as I'll say, the hard work doesn't stop now, because we've and we can sit back. The hard work continues now, and I guess the benchmark's there from our executive push, and hopefully, what we want to see is more students coming to Australia, and ultimately, enrolling with us would be great. But we understand that some students like to go to other parts of Australia, and we totally respect their decisions to do so. But then, at the end of the day, if they come and do a vocational course in a TAFE, whether it's here, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, or Perth, or Canberra, or Hobart, it's that experience that hopefully they get through going through a certificate or diploma, and then the outcome they get at the other end of being able to have that industry engagement, opening up the doors to employment, and having that Australian experience, which we all want. So, it's exciting times. 2020 is a good year for us. We feel getting the award end of last year is a real showpiece for us, and we will be showcasing it throughout the year ahead, and hopefully we'll see how it goes, and hopefully the results come through.
Yep, that sounds really great, and I think it's really well deserved. And thank you so much for joining us today. I've really got so much out of our conversation. I think there's a lot that we can think about differently when it comes to international students, and just the agility of the TAFE sector in separate from international students anyway. I think we need to start thinking about things in a different way, which is why I love having these conversations on this podcast, and we get to think about different things. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for this time, Tanya, and I really appreciate that, given the opportunity to showcase what TAFE can offer. And that, we're a lot different to where we were 20, 30 years ago in the dark dungeons and the long white corridors. So fun and vibrant and exciting.